I was just going to be walking you through my work, basically, some of the ideas underlying the work, like where things started. So basically, yes, I group things under like speculative history and speculative fiction. And I would explain how these two things like relate to an ongoing project of mine called the oral remains of my oral tradition, and another project, previous one called radical displacement. But actually, to start, like to give an in-depth idea, I would actually like to start with my name. So as Nelly was introducing me, she was saying my name is Fahmy Shahin, yes, but actually the name is quite a revealing things in general for cultures. So I come from Egypt, where we have like really long naming systems. Like it goes to basically 5 names, sometimes to 6, 7s, and even sometimes really people can go up to like 15 or even 20. But then I come to the Netherlands, and I have the problem, of course, that here they can only keep the name up to 3 names, just because they don't have enough space. So the system basically wanted to reduce. Later on, that turns out to be like a bigger issue. But just to explain why this is important and what's the significance of it. In Cairo, there's just a usual traffic jam in Cairo. So one time, as I'm stuck in this traffic jam with a taxi driver, he started to explain to me why having really long names is important, because that way we can keep our tradition, and basically we can encode the whole history in our names. And he started to explain to me the whole thing with family trees, which is basically like let's say an unofficial document that you can get as a Muslim, as an Arab person, that this document would basically keep going up to your father and his father and his father and so on, maybe all the way to the Prophet, hoping that this tree would link to the Prophet, and that gives you a lot of advantages. He started to explain the advantages that I get if I link my family to the Prophet, which he himself was trying to prove at the moment. Basically, he says that you go to this place, which is called Al Azhar, is the highest, if someone doesn't know, is the highest religious reference or institution in the Sunni Islamic world. He says when you get this family tree document and it proves that, it shows that you link to the Prophet, you basically take this document and go to this place and get it legalized. And after they legalize it, basically you can get like a salary from Saudi Arabia, because you are one of the like important people. So basically, Al Azhar can issue a certificate like this. Basically, the certificate says that we acknowledge that this person is or belongs to the family of the Prophet. This one says to the Al Hassan, which is also descent of the Prophet. This whole conversation, of course, triggered something that I remember actually in home in my family. We had actually a document that arguably is one of these family trees. Um, this document, I remember I had it as a child, but I didn't really have a big memory of it. The only thing that I remember, that the document basically, instead of linking us to the family of the Prophet, it rather linked us to like some kind of Jewish tribe that later on converted to Islam. But basically, that was the twist for this thing. Probably that's why it has been hidden since then. But I got really intrigued with the whole idea of the family trees and how these unofficial documents, they are actually very valuable, because we can actually track like a lot of things. Like we can track geography, we can see how certain tribes or certain families moved from one place to the other, and we can also see how things are being tweaked or forced to give a sense of identity to some people. So the previous one, as I was saying, it was sorry, that was the family tree, like the original one of my family, which I think it was drafted maybe in the late 70s, when the whole thing was being popular. And it was actually being popular because Saudi Arabia at the time was just discovering oil, and there was a lot of money, and they were becoming big on this idea of the prophets descends like all over the world. That's another document, is a popular document that you can find, you can buy in the streets, which is also another kind of family tree. This one is very comprehensive. This one basically, it shows like the prophet. Of course, you can see here, like one thing that I find very interesting was the whole idea of family trees, the text. Like, so the whole reference family to the tree is never really, doesn't exist. Maybe here they go a little bit with the idea of the leaves. This one goes to the prophet, how many people did he marry, and like, and his descendants basically. So it starts from here. So I think the idea is that we, like normal people, start from here and try to go up, hoping that they link eventually to this. So, you know, that gives you the link and you go from here. So I start to try to make my own family tree, but I take it a bit further, of course. Like for me, the biggest question that a family tree, like something like the family album, I need to see like portraits of these like family members. And more importantly, that we are very desperate to go all the way up to the prophet, but like there's no idea really where the prophet, it all just stops here. And for me, it's perhaps more interesting actually to go up and see where this prophet himself, wasn't he proud of his family tree himself, or was that not like such an important issue? And of course, that's my research basically about the pre-Islamic Arabia, which is an area, that's why I use the term speculative fiction, because this is an area basically that has very little documents or evidence that things that we can deal with. All what we have are basically documents like what my family has, which are very debatable. So the big family tree, this work, basically it tries to chart like sort of historical and geographical history of pre-Islamic Arabia through symbols. The symbols that are like the influential gods that influence basically the newborn religion. But I'll come back to this. That was just like an entry because of my name and the whole thing. But now I go back to Europe in 2015. This is in France. Of course, that was in the wake of the Paris attacks, and it was also the wake of the Syrian refugees, like influx into Europe. ISIS claiming like huge areas in Syria and Iraq. There was an extremely increasing state of paranoia, as you can see here in front of Gare de Lyon, where they basically try to send message to the mass that don't worry, we can also do some shows. But I realized, of course, that my name, that what I was talking about earlier, this the fact that my ID, Dutch ID, lost two of my names, something that I didn't think is significant, but actually it turned out to be really significant, because I received this letter from the immigration service, that's the most important place, of course, as an immigrant in the Netherlands. Basically, the letter has no it has explanation, but basically it says that we have information that you haven't been living here for years, and therefore we terminate your right of residency. But we only give you 2 weeks to prove that you are living here, which was a really quite difficult task, because basically, I mean, nothing really can prove so much as that you can't Photoshop, for instance. Like I can use images or bank receipts or things like that, but everything can be fake. But in my journey to prove basically where am I start to come around the idea of mapping. So making the maps, when I started to think of maps, I came to this point because of different factors, not only the letter, of course, but most importantly for me was the Syrian person that I met in Amsterdam, who we met in really casual settings. And when I asked, like, how did he end up here? He said he just walked. And when I asked how long, he said 26 days. And I mean, it really rang like, it triggered something that I've been thinking about a lot, being in Amsterdam and always trying to go to Cairo. and always thinking of Egypt as like a remote or alien place that I have to parachute myself into. Like this idea of Egypt as a place that has land borders, that I can approach it from surrounding places. This concept doesn't exist in the Middle East. Like that, basically you just need to jump over a place. And for me, the idea that I can walk there in 26 days really sounded like not really bad at all. Of course, like hopefully not fleeing from war. But I start to think of maps in terms of distance and proximity, and also in terms of time. The maps also were for me like a way that I tried to communicate to the immigration service in the Netherlands that they exist, that basically, because when I start to think of existence, you start to think, you know, what really reality like do you mean? Do you mean like this material one that like I bought this or I did this, or like my experience? And for me, this idea of talking about your experience or making a map of your experience, then it needs to not be bound by time or can all request. So I would make maps of my experience, maps of concepts that I'm struggling with. That, of course, was heavily influenced by an Egyptian novel that I actually put in the references, where the protagonist, yes, in this novel, which is called The Strange Incidents in the City of Mars. The City of Mars is Cairo, actually. That's the name of it. But basically, in this novel, the protagonist, he starts to make, he's someone who's losing his mind, basically. And he starts to make maps that basically goes in his routine or in his commute. So he goes from one place to the other, like 4 or 5 places at his work or this cafe and a friend, like few places, and he starts to make these maps. And basically every day he charts these lines until he ends up with actually something that reveals some sort of a crazy like story, like a conspiracy theory, basically. But I was very intrigued by the idea that how our commute, like basically that we almost have these devices, like we are a Google like device that we really record very well, like all the details of things that repeat, like when we commute. And for me, the commuting in different cities somehow link places like too much together. So that was sort of the beginning, how I approach like the ideas of maps, like that I bring like different like locations together. I bring my experience in the military with my experience in Amsterdam. Also try to group things together. Then, of course, in order to bring this into work that was in Milan, I created a narrative, which is so I made this like when you're in the museum, for instance, and you have the audio guide where you can hear like the background like story about the work. So you have headphones here that you hear a story about Sultan, who is so you hear the story from the point of view of a museum, which is the owner of this collection. And the museum says that we own this collection because we came across this book called Radical Display. The book Radical Displacement, although it was written by an academic, it's been defined or like genre as a pseudo-academic because the author of the book makes some kind of a science fiction argument that Sultan, the person who made maps, living has some sort of phenomenon that allowed him to live two places at the same time, in Cairo and Amsterdam. And he has proof through this book, Radical Displacement, that he was actually, that this person can have multiple existence at these two places at the same time. And the museum eventually couldn't verify like this, but they were intrigued with the story, so they eventually decided to show it. Of course, the whole thing, even from the drawing style, like the sort of childish and automatic drawing, the whole idea is also some sort of underlying humor or joke, is that the idea that so the Sultan, like the other or the alien, he was only allowed basically to speak or to have his defense through a European person, like a mediator. And somehow they can only see from the Sultan like some sort of fantastical being, that it's very likely that they believe that he lived in two places at the same time, then like say easier than believing that he was just living here like normally. Um, so the whole idea of maps, of course, it kept going, but only in 2018 here I put this work into place together. Uh, and one very important reference, of course, here that I have to mention was this work, which is the book called Modernity at Large by Arjun Appadurai, who's also a board member of the University of the Underground, by the way. Why this book is very influencing to the work, radical displacement, because he talks about this very important issue or point that is facilitated by images, basically, which is the idea of dreaming or imagination, or like even daydreaming, if we can call it that. That basically he argues that it's not anymore like a far-fetched thing, that actually they are very thought of position that we aspire and we consciously like, you know, move to. Uh, and for me, like this idea is very important in this let's say time of globalization, where let's say like the underdeveloped world is somehow struggling or finding no place, or only aspiring to let's say to build or to reenact certain images, and he somehow thinks of this as a very important point. One of the maps of radical displacement, or the maps that I was creating, that was of course addressing or trying to go along the war in Syria, with of course a lot of underlying religious conspiracy theories that I was trying to explore at the time, 2016. Basically, this map I developed into into this 3D sculpture. So instead of creating different maps together, I decided to collect them all in one map, and then so this is a 3D sketch of the work, but it just shows the work better than the video documentation of the work itself. But basically the idea that it's a one map, but the map is deconstructed. So if you can see here, like on the wall, this is the map, but then there's a river. The river broke out of the map to connect to another thing, to the sea. While with this gesture, it starts to show like another map or another like ocean underneath of basically like the unrepresented. And the sculpture that is coming out of the map here, which is, let's say, as if it's bred by what's happening here. It has symbols of power and religion, which is appropriation of the Leviathan, the book cover by Thomas Hobbes, who is basically representing the body of the state by a body that is made out of infinite number of people, or like a huge number of people, that gives it the power or legitimacy, and then it becomes the thing that shall not be beaten, as he. So I take this form as a form again of a hybrid creature that doesn't only, so I mixed this with the Islamic idea of the Antichrist, but the idea of a hybrid creature, that this creature doesn't exist in its own, but exists in imagination. And this power of imagination somehow gives it a material being. And I make this, of course, I make it 3D printing, or 3D printed, the sculpture. That's again part of this research. To hint to this underlying nature of the struggle in Syria on the one hand of the for oil or petroleum. So this is the sculpture 3D printed of transparent resin. This work was developed also for the book called the 3D Additivist cookbook, It's free actually online that you can download. It's a collection of essays that are accompanied by 3D models, free OBJ files or STL files that you can download freely. Each one, I mean, is a huge book that each one has its own thing, but basically all of them are tied together into the idea of using 3D printing or additivism technology as a sort of activism. This book was developed by Fahmy Shahin, who is an Iranian artist living in New York, and Daniel Rourke, who's a British artist and writer living in London. And that's an image of the work itself, which is, I can show. So this is the sculpture, is made of prints on acrylic sheets and then laser cut together and assembled on a TV, a big TV screen that has a 3 minutes animation that is looping with the 3D sculpture. But yeah, that was in 2016. Actually, it's a bit old now. But why I'm talking about this now, because I find it very important to the idea of maps and imagination. So this is arguably the first world map. It's created in 1158 by a person called Al-Idrisi, who was a Moroccan Andalusian geographer. He was commissioned by the Sicilian king at the time to actually travel the world and compile a description of the world and a map. And he made 70 little booklets with illustrations that together the illustrations create one big map. He's actually arguably also the first one who recognized that the world is not flat, that Earth is not flat, basically. Why I find this very interesting, because it's actually quite scientific. He traveled for almost 15 years and he collected like huge information and quite accurate in many places. But then he comes at some other places and insert these like fantastical or religious narratives or like stories that are only based on certain interpretation of religious text. So they are not really evidential. They are only our way to understand certain text, like this word Gog and Magog. So basically, these are biblical figures that, yes, I mean, like, of course, like if you're familiar a little bit with the Islamic culture, so these are biblical figures that are used in the Islam to think of the end of days. And because in the Islamic verse, it says that this Gog and Magog nation are locked behind some kind of a wall. And when this wall collapses, they're just going to emerge. And so, I mean, there's always, this is an object of speculation. Where is this place? Where is this wall? I mean, of course, this guy like pinpointed this place. He basically found where this Gog and Magog, which is quite a debatable thing. But then I find this idea is very interesting, that he didn't have to have like a sort of only religious approach to the map, or he didn't need to have only scientific approach to it. He actually both go together at the same time. And for me, that was just like the gesture of his own position to the whole world, his view. So this is the place. And actually, if you can see here, that's the wall that. Yeah, this wall is also very interesting because there is an urban legend that until now it's very powerful, that every Friday in the week, if someone needs to read a certain verse from the Quran, it's called the cave, because when we read the verse, the wall stays erect. So basically, if you can see, the wall is almost breaking here. So the idea is that throughout the week, the wall like almost falls down, and then we come Friday and the good believers start to pray and start to read this verse very specifically. So as if this is a spell and the verse is the potion. And I grew up, of course, like everyone, my father was reading this verse every Friday. We never questioned this even, and like we took it for granted that just like he casually saves the world every Friday from this evil nation. So basically, that was kind of a starting point of this work, which called Journey in the Land Where Time Rests. But basically, I find an object that acts similarly to the idea of the wall, but more like a popular another popular object. And there is this is an ancient Egyptian figure, Shah or Set, which is the Set animal. Makes a hybrid of fox and wolf, and basically was all drawn on the walls of temples and graves because he was assigned to protect graves. But later on in the popular culture, like in the let's say beginning of 1900, his name changed from the grave protector to the grave digger because it became the one in the culture that. And in the 1990s, there was rumors in Cairo and the suburbs that an animal that looks exactly like this, like sort of going wild and just like attacking kids. I mean, of course, it was a thing like to kill kids, but like, I mean, I still remember. It's for me, it's amazing how this sort of like fable like stayed like thousands of years and keep having like transformation, and everyone eventually have their share of owning this. I take this, of course, I try to create like my, let's say, virtual space of where these stories are being made, where the wall of the Gog and Magog and where the Shah or the Set animal. I usually just start with a sketch, but eventually I bring them to like physical. So I started to make like 3D prints of the Shah animal, and then I took it like a step further and made it which something that serves the purpose, that is made out of layers. I think, I don't know, this is almost 1,000 layers of just transparent layers to indicate how this is like a product of a collective product, is a product of everyone's imagination, that it's not a specific one. And he traveled a lot. Like he's been traveling since like 2017, only just came back. So yes, this is, and of course, last thing to say about this Gog and Magog thing, that because
Fahmy,
one of
are you going to show them the dog? I mean the animal. Do you have a picture of it?
I have it in itself. Like you mean the big one or the small one?
Yeah, I mean this is the small one. But what
Yeah.
about the big one? The one that are you talking about? The one that I saw like the other day? The one
Yeah,
that you
yeah.
really
This is what I was just showing.
ah.
This one. This.
But right now we are seeing the drawing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's why I thought that I should tell
Oh,
you.
what I get, because okay, because I have full screens and
Because right now we are seeing the drawing of the dog with like the three characters with a big beard.
yeah, no, wait, because it's sharing, the screen, different screens, but 1 second.
I mean, so far we had let's see.
Now we see, right?
That's what we are seeing. We are seeing Variation 2017.
Oh, you're still seeing Variations 2017. Okay,
Yeah.
let's just, here, just 1 second. Yeah, so that's what I was talking about. That's the ancient Egyptian animal thing. That was so what I was just talking about. That's the 3D sketch, the 3D prints, and that's the sculpture itself is made of the layers that I was just describing. Sorry, I didn't know that I wasn't on the screen. Yes. And then like these are just like different places that it has been to. So, and also I might as well show this since we weren't on the screen. This is what I was talking about of the Egyptian book, that the guy who's drawing maps of his commute, and the maps eventually show this sort of conspiracy theory. And yes, so I get back to the names. Yes, so the family tree that I started are a series of portraits, family portraits, and basically speculating on these pre-Islamic gods, but also mixing them together to sort of suggest where things like could come from, to sort of to give some sort of background. Like I try to do the same as they do in this family tree document, to take leverage basically in, and I also try to make like a little bit of separation between image and text, to make it clear also that there was sort of a really harsh transformation from images to text. This of course developed into another thing, which is creating these fake artifacts or like antiquities. Basically, the idea is that a lot of things that why we say speculative research, because we have no document. Why? Because they must things. And the thing is, there are actually quite a lot of documents and antiquities, but most of them, they are locked in like auction houses and in things like that. And for me, this is very interesting because things that are being sold, like, I mean, of course, I actually, I received the newsletters from Christie's since like years. And I see that there was like this really rare manuscript of the Quran, something that, you know, like the whole world of academics, scholars be interested to see. And it was sold for like £400,000 or something like that. Basically, I tried to start my auction business, and I try to. So I don't make it completely fake. I keep, this is old code, which is metal powder and resin, but I keep the other side resin clear. So the idea is that, you know, if like what kind of person you're interested, like if you're really interested to buy this old artifact from like Christie, that it's actually a real thing that should be in a museum, maybe we should make you a fake one, and that you could use it instead. This is another thing is also, so there were these three popular Arabian gods, Alad and Al-Uzza and Manat, and I mixed them basically together to create one thing.
And Fahmy,
I take this, of course.
here we go. I mean, maybe we should tell them that this is one of the plan, one of our next fundraiser at the University of Underground is.
That's the idea, that we want to create indeed just fake sculptures, fake artifacts of everything. Everything should go on this website. Site is inspired by a place called Katawiki. Maybe someone know it. Katawiki is an auction, is user-based auction place where you can, as a user, you can upload your model. Not model really, like a real. That's the thing. That's why it's weird. You can upload it, but then you can say that, oh, it's safe and it's not like smuggled or something, and then you can actually offer it for sale. So I tried to upload my sculpture and sort of say that it's a second 2nd century AD sculpture that has been found Petra in Jordan. Of course, they didn't approve my submission. So I went ahead, of course, and I started to make my own website. And the idea of the website that I would have experts because that's what they have in these websites. So how an object gets its value? I mean, of course, like no one cares if it's really, this is 5,000. I don't think it's a 5,000 years old object is being sold for 300 euros on the internet. It's probably not really like that. But you only need this expert certificate with it that basically says that. And so I have a few friends, and myself, of course, that we're gonna be the experts, and the objects that I create, like for instance, this is like a commemorative coin that I was just creating like last night or the day before. It's made of pure silver, of course. Yeah, that's the this is where I'm heading to actually at the moment. That's a silver coin. It's quite heavyweight, so that will cost you.
Are you knowing the crisis in this industry as well, Fahmy? Do you feel that you have less buy at the moment because of Corona? Like people are not
of course,
going for it.
You know, like everyone is a bit worried now, but I mean it's. So I think that was the end of my presentation. I think it's yeah, right. We can have some questions and things.
Amazing. So anyone, if you have questions, you know the saying, like put them in the chat or just take on the, just switch, put your microphone on and then you will appear on our screen, I guess. For Fahmy.
Yeah.
And Fahmy, did you ever worked with dance in your, because I know that you're trained as a textile designer, so you've done a lot of work. I don't know if you have not seen, if you show them or not, some of the textile experiments you've done as well. But do you want to tell them?
Yeah, no, I haven't. Yeah, I haven't shown now anything. It's quite like, yes, I mean, textile is very interesting, of course, but I still really didn't get to like any kind of sort of experiments that I need. I think because I never really have like a proper working space like for textile. It's part of the process, but dance. Yes, I worked with dance, not myself, in filming, like filming dancers. No, I actually I see dance more. That's why I was recommending or suggesting the Cara Lynch work Invisible, because for me, like reenactment and movements, like like creating a movement. I mean, like a movement, like a sort of an idea that like sort of motivate and bring people in somehow. I put them together in one large group or category.
I've just copied the reading list that you sent as well. And you have a question from Michaela. Michaela, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. Hey.
Thank you.
So you mentioned when you're speaking about the Syrian person that you'd met that you were surprised about how flexible borders were and that you could just walk from one country to the other. And this is actually something that I'm looking at in my research because I'm based in Tel Aviv. And this is something that really with the quarantine has been really something I've been thinking about a lot, like this inability to just walk from Israel into the neighboring countries.
Yeah.
And I was curious about your experience because you also said that you had something similar, or maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, my experience is the opposite. That it's actually, since I moved to Europe, I experienced what it means to have actually land borders and countries next to each other. Because in Egypt, like there is no. I mean, actually in Egypt, it's quite not easy to move inside the country from the amount of checkpoints. But to leave the country, this is just like is an idea that just is not there. That's what I'm saying. Sometimes the only way for me to go from Amsterdam to Cairo is just one flight, one way, like, one route. Mm-hmm. And if this flight costs 2,000 euros, you have no other options. It's not like, for instance, that I want to go to France, then I fly to Brussels and I take a train or this idea just, because then that's what I was saying. when I met this guy, I was really like, for maybe months before that, because the summer, the flight tickets gets too expensive. So I have to wait. And when I met this guy and said that, I was really thinking like, okay, maybe I can fly to Libya and walk, or maybe I can fly to Turkey and then like I go and, but then, you know, I fly to Israel and walk through Sinai and like there is no, this concept is just, it's not
exactly.
there.
It's something that really is strong in Europe, of course. There's barely any borders.
Yeah, that's why I find this walking is quite, like, that's why for me, like the maps was basically recording things that I like, that happens like what I see in walking in different places. And that's why I think also the book that I was referring to, the Egyptian novel, that the guy who was making the maps, it was also about walking.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, it's quite a thing. That's why I was really impressed and intrigued by this person who just like walked and like, 26 days, which, I mean, if there was no war, that would be really popular, like hiking route. Imagine like the Balkans and like, you know, the Turkey and really nice
Yeah,
landscape.
it's beautiful.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Cool, thanks.
I can't hear you, Nelly.
Sorry, I was saying there is one of the researcher here, Tuva. I don't know if Tuva is there, who is working with militaries, and I don't know if you share that with them. But you yourself, I mean, the co-director of the University of the Underground, everyone, has been going through the entire process of being a military in Egypt. So maybe you can share some knowledge on how to approach militaries. Is it Tuva who is working with militaries? Or
Yeah. That would be great to hear.
So maybe tell Fahmy a bit more about what you intend to ask to the military. I mean, you're in Finland or Norway?
I'm in Sweden now, and I'm interested in how the military kind of is treating a climate crisis as a threat, and how they are getting ready for that.
Yeah.
Maybe tell them about the bottles as well in Egypt, Fahmy, because nobody knows about that.
The what in Egypt?
The water and the military.
Oh, yeah. That's the, I mean, of course it's, I mean, when you say climate, of course, because the military in Egypt is quite different than the places, because the military is, let's say, owns 30% of the economy independently from being a military. But, you know, they have products that compete in the market. So not just the military, really, you know. So when you talk about climate, they have a double thing. They have the military business, but they also have the manufacturing businesses that makes, like, you know, like water. For instance, they make water bottles, they make pasta, and they make, and I mean, that's another story. In my own opinion, I don't fully disagree all the way with this. You know, you're in a large, huge country, not in the best conditions, and making food basically is something that you can think about it as a national security issue. But I mean, it's an important question. I have to say that the whole climate thing, since the last up to one, it's coming to like a very interesting thing in Egypt, because this is, of course, like, there's no language for talking about climate in Arabic. It's a Western language that we import to talk about. And of course, with that, you bring, you don't just, so basically you bring certain ways of like seeing the world, and certain ideas of and possibilities how you should do things. And that's kind of doesn't really go well with the idea that these places, maybe they don't have the language for this, but they have been surviving for thousands of years, which means that they know very well how to take care of the land. Like, for instance, if we talk about the fertility of the land and agriculture, and if we talk about in many different aspects, like the easiest point in that point is that in the underdeveloped world, actually people need the resources in a much more direct way, in a way that makes you quite, you know, careful about like using them. But of course, like if you think of the bigger thing, like I mean, everyone eventually causes a certain amount of pollution, and like so the military definitely are not they are not like helping in this, but I have to say that in Egypt, since maybe is really very early country that started with a lot of regulations to try to control the pollution a bit, but it's
But
disaster. I have to also say.
is your recommendation then for Tuva to kind of approach the military with like a specific case within the context of climate change, or to just approach it from the basis of climate change? You know, are you saying to her to be quite specific to the question, how do you approach militaries, for example, in Egypt? What's the kind of, let's say as an artist now that you're not in the military anymore, how will you go on about like trying to work within, you know, with the militaries as an artist?
I wouldn't. No, but I mean, because you're talking, I mean, that's again, like if you're talking about the Egyptian military, it's a one side, it's a one-way thing. You know, you
You have
either,
to be a military to work with the militaries. That's what you're saying.
or you just have to be with them. Like, you know, you have to sort of do what they like. You know, that's the thing, which is means like not being critical, like not being like, no, this is really that's why I think it's even quite problematic in Egypt to make things against the military, either pro or against. I mean, it's a situation like, let's say it's a bubble, it's a huge bubble that maybe it's not for the best, and it's, you know, it's for the best of everyone that this bubble is not burst like right now, or, you know, and this bubble is being experiencing like really high level of pressure, and the level of aggression on the other side, you know, that comes from this military, this big bubble, is quite also large.
But I think, yeah, no, I think it's really important what you're saying. I mean, ultimately, I think, yeah, Tuva, the context in Egypt is extremely different from the context in Sweden. I mean, I think we understand that, like 30% being the economy of Egypt,
and it's
led
very
by the
easy.
military, it's very different from Sweden. I don't know what the numbers are in Sweden, but I doubt that Swedish militaries are even involved in the kind of the overall economy of the country, but I don't know.
But
I mean,
like I would say, if you think about a climate issue in Egypt in general, so you can always remove Egypt and put military instead of Egypt, and it would be the same. Like, you know, just because it is the military that is in control of pretty much everything eventually. So, you know, they are the one who really approve like what kind of new direction or new like laws or directions you need to go to.
so I just want to make sure that we address, there is some question from Thong. Where are you, Thong?
Yeah, here.
Yeah. So
You ask a few questions. You're the specialist of the few questions. One question, if you can try and, you know, compact it. We have 5 minutes.
I have one question. Yeah, I'm just gonna read it as I wrote it.
Yeah,
Sure.
go ahead.
I mean, the first two questions are literally, you can throw them away. But how do you relate your legal identity, the one that is defined, that has removed 2 of your names and requires you to produce receipts for your existence within your immigration process within the Netherlands, with your broader conception of your identity? So, you know, one is, you know, kind of probably more sincere, more embodied, but the other one you're forced to kind of define yourself by, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well, I mean, now there are actually 2 names, like, so they're not 3 even. Like, I decided to drop the third one, and I only keep them 2. Well, I think like this is exactly like this is where the whole thing like is starting, and it's still, this is the area of struggle or conflict, is that there's no one thing. So, you know, you always create the illusion to yourself that you're one and the same with your body and how you feel, until you hit like some kind of a wall or a rock, or like someone that triggers this, you know, that then like makes you again realize that, you know, it's I think like in the way that I think of my own legal identity, it hasn't changed. Like, I mean, however people define me now, that I'm a Dutch citizen and like not like Egypt, I think like the feel that the thing you know about yourself is always remain the same. And I started to just get more professional about bureaucracy, that like, you know, you create like some degree of separation between yourself. And I think this is facilitated now by that a lot of things you can do online. And actually, when I do the whole identity thing online, it feels much easier and I'm much more confident. And then I can actually own it even more than when I am at the airport, for instance, and I have to then like to move through this invisible border from one place to the other. And then you realize that you're not like the other, but your legal situation supposedly is the same, but it's not the same. So it's fluid, yeah.
So would you say that your way of resisting perhaps is to kind of master the bureaucracy?
Yeah, exactly. And just like, you know, to be able to jump from one state and one identity to the other, like very smoothly and swiftly. Yeah, that's like, there's no other way. Or the other way is to do like my Syrian friend, like to know like
Just walk.
you know the roots, exactly, just walk. Keep walking. Yeah.